Hello, I'm Amber Stoneberg and welcome to Vendor Maintenance. In this session we'll be reviewing how to enter new vendor records as well as maintain existing ones. To navigate, you'll go under Modules, Accounts Payable, Main, and Vendor Maintenance. We'll start off with reviewing an existing vendor account in the system and then enter a brand new one from scratch. For an example, we have vendor number 01-Airway. The vendor number will consist of up to 7 digits alone. Those can include alphanumerical characters. If you have divisions enabled in Accounts Payable Setup options, your entire vendor number will be preceded with a 2-digit division code. The display name for the vendor goes into the name field. And here we have, down on the main tab, we have their address information here that can be filled out. We have up to 3 different address lines, as well as a zip code, city, state, and I'll come back to the primary contact here in a second. In order to fill out the remaining constant contact information, we have the telephone number, the fax field, email address, and URL or website address. For the address field, we have a button that will launch MapQuest and pop in the vendor's address for you. This button next to the email field will launch your default email client, whether that be Outlook or another type of client, and fill in the appropriate email address for you. Populate the vendor's website address into your default internet browser window. As far as the contact is concerned, we can have multiple contacts per vendor. In order to start one contact entry, simply type in a new name and Contact Maintenance will open up after asking you if this is a new contact. If you say yes, we'll put you into Vendor Contact Maintenance so that you can enter in a brand new name, an address if different, and other contact information regarding the client. After accessing Vendor Contact Maintenance, you can enter in a new name, a new address if applicable, as well as other contact information related to the new contact. If there are multiple contacts added for vendors, one should be designated as the primary. Maintaining multiple contacts can be done from 2 different places in vendor maintenance. The first place is the Contacts button at the top right. This will place you back into Vendor Contact Maintenance so that you can either A, select existing contact codes, or add a new one. The other way to access that is from the hyperlink here for Primary Contact. And then you can assign one as the primary contact that will display as the primary contact for all purchases for this vendor. This is a default terms code for the vendor for all transactions, whether that be AP invoices or purchase orders. Again, this is simply just the default. A different terms code can be selected for each type of transaction later on. A reference field is used for reporting purposes and is user definable. Will hold up to 15 different characters and can be used on different sorting and reporting. If the temporary vendor checkbox is checked, this will control how and when vendors will be purged from the system. If this is a one-time vendor purchase that you'll be making with 01-Airway, for instance, and you do not want to retain their history in the system after that purchase is made and the payment is made, you can select this temporary vendor checkbox, and after the next period and processing is completed, this vendor will be purged from the system. Most of the time, you will keep the temporary vendor checkbox deselected. If this vendor is a credit card vendor, in transactions such as invoice data entry and manual check entry, you will be able to transfer previously posted invoices for other vendors to this credit card vendor. For instance, you may pay a bill by credit card and you will need to record that in the system. In order to transfer other invoices and purchases made by credit card to a specific vendor account in the system, this credit card vendor checkbox will need to be checked. If you'd like to place the entire vendor account on hold for payment, and that will include all invoices for this vendor, you can do so by selecting this box. If there is a tax exemption number on file with the vendor for your company, you can indicate that by selecting this checkbox here. You will need to assign a default tax schedule. If there are no sales tax reporting required in AP or is not set up, you will simply select non-tax or none at all. If there is sales tax reporting selected in AP setup options, you'll want to have at least one tax schedule assigned to each vendor, as well as appropriate tax class. On the Additional tab, we have more default information related to the vendor. We have their default expense general ledger account that will populate an appropriate AP transaction entry. If this vendor requires a separate check for every invoice that is processed through the system, you can select this checkbox here. The comment field allows you to put in a string of characters that will print on vendor mailing labels. Under the printing section, we have a sort field. This again is another type of user-definable field that can be used in both reporting and sorting purposes. Batch fax allows you to integrate with other third-party faxing programs and can be used to send multiple purchase orders, in this case for a vendor, from the system in one batch. Use PO receipt of invoice entry for this vendor allows you to be prompted when processing an invoice through accounts payable invoice data entry. If you would like to be flagged that this vendor should, for the most part, be a vendor that you process invoices through the purchase order module, then this flag will remind you that this is more than likely a PO receipt of invoice vendor rather than an expense vendor. Primary purchase address. We can select to maintain multiple location codes for each vendor as far as where or obtain services from. Location code can be up to 4-digit code. Enter in the address, the appropriate contact if there is one, and the tax schedule. Accept to save your changes, and assign one as the primary. To maintain purchase addresses, again, two ways. From the drop-down menu up at the top right, or from the hyperlink for primary purchase address. If you are requiring 1099 reporting in the accounts payable system, you can select to maintain different vendor types for your vendor records. If they are not a 1099 vendor, simply leave the type as none. Otherwise, as you select either business or individual, the rest of the fields should be filled out here. For business, you will need to fill in a taxpayer ID number. For individual, you'll want to type in a social security number. The default form will be designated as miscellaneous interest or dividend for the appropriate vendor. You can also set a default box number for all payments for this vendor to be posted to. If they are miscellaneous box 9 vendor, that checkbox can be selected. Once there are payment records for a vendor created, and that vendor is a 1099 vendor, payment history will be able to be viewed from the 1099 history button. If they have dollar amounts posting to multiple form types, and for as many calendar years as you're retaining 1099 history, you'll be able to select and change between the different types and the different years. If this vendor has multiple payments posting to different types, you can change between different form types here, as well as changing the calendar year for as many years as you're retaining 1099 history, and be able to view and or maintain the different dollar amounts for each box the payments are being reported to. On the Statistics tab, we'll see last activity information for the vendor, as well as aging information. Summary, a simple summary of purchases, payments, discounts taken, and discounts lost by 3 different buckets: period to date, year to date, and prior year. For as long as you're retaining purchase history, the number of years in accounts payable setup options, you'll be able to change between a certain period and year and see the history populate in these fields. The History tab also gives us the same information as we saw on the Summary tab. However, this would be a year at a glance. Simply changing between years here, fiscal years defined, as well as how many years you are retaining history in the system, you'll be able to select to see a whole year at a glance and a total for the year. On the Invoices tab, you'll be able to see invoice history for this vendor, both paid and open invoices. As you can see, we have a lot of fields available from our invoice data entry. As you can see, we have many different types of transactions showing up on this screen here. On the primary grid here, or the top portion, you'll be able to see the invoice date, due date, amount, and if there's an open balance, as well as an invoice header comment and other fields. If you're looking for something in particular, you can click to sort in order on any of the columns, and you can click to sort by ascending or descending order on any of the columns in this grid to help you locate an invoice record more quickly. You can also search for transactions by clicking on the binoculars button. Once highlighting an invoice number in the primary or the top grid, you'll be able to see down at the bottom any adjustments or transactions related to that invoice. You'll also be able to view the current aging information down at the bottom of the total screen. A different way to view the same information is on the Transactions tab. And again, these columns can be sorted, searched by, or even drilled down into. Once you highlight a record, you can simply double-click to be able to see the invoice and history, the main information, the expense accounts, and any corresponding payments if there are. This view on the Transactions tab not only gives us the invoice information, but also the corresponding payment or adjustment information related to that invoice. So it's really just 2 different ways of seeing the same type of information. On the Checks tab, we have all payments made to this vendor. This will include payments processed through manual check entry as well as regular check maintenance. As long as you're retaining history for payment history, we'll be also able to drill down on these records as well to see the bank code, the check date, and the check amount, as well as any invoices that were paid by this payment. Using the payment history or the zoom button works just the same as if you were to double-click on the transaction. Finally, for the tabs, we have the POs tab. If you have purchase order installed and active, you will be able to see all open POs for this vendor on this tab, including the PO number, the PO type, order date, required date, dollar amounts, and last invoice information. To complete vendor maintenance, we have a couple more buttons to look at here. We've gone over contacts and purchase addresses. We're also able to enter in a remit to address for the vendor. If this vendor requires that payments are sent to a different address other than the one that we designated on the main tab, a vendor remit to address can be entered in here. And finally, the items button will show us detailed receipt history for items purchased through purchase order, as well as vendor-specific pricing and vendor aliases. The renumber button here allows us to renumber a vendor number if, for instance, it was typed in incorrectly. But keep in mind the renumber button will not work from this screen if this vendor has any history, including invoices and payments. Vendor numbers will have to be renumbered via the Accounts Payable Utilities menu if this vendor does have history records. Click Accept after maintaining any existing vendor to save your changes. To enter in a new vendor, simply enter in a new vendor number. Again, if you are using divisions, you will want to precede the vendor number with the appropriate division code. One button that will allow us to copy from an existing vendor account to populate such information as addresses, contacts, and so on. The Copy From button will allow us to copy other vendor information to this new vendor number, which will include vendor contact information and addresses. Or you can simply create one from scratch. Once you define all of the necessary information and defaults for a vendor, simply click the Accept button to save your changes. Thank you for joining me today for Vendor Maintenance. I'm Amber Stoneberg.